In the early 5th century AD, Europe stood at a historic crossroads. For nearly 500 years, the Roman world had shaped the political, military, and cultural order of the Mediterranean and beyond. Roman law governed distant provinces. Roman roads connected continents. Roman armies once guaranteed stability from Britain to North Africa. But by the time Attila the Hun was born, that world was beginning to fracture. The Western Roman Empire was weakening under the weight of internal corruption, shrinking revenues, and constant military pressure. Emperors rose and fell in rapid succession. Generals often held more power than rulers. Provinces that once supplied wealth and soldiers were slipping away. In the east, centered on Constantinople, the Eastern Roman Empire remained stronger. Yet even there, stability came at a high price. Vast sums of gold were spent to defend borders and appease enemies. Diplomacy was increasingly backed by payments rather than force. Beyond Rome's frontiers, powerful forces were gathering. Across the vast grasslands of Central Asia and Eastern Europe, nomadic confederations had long moved with the seasons, mastering horseback warfare and survival in harsh environments. Among these peoples were the Huns, highly mobile, militarized societies whose strength lay in speed, discipline, and adaptability. During the late 4th century, Hunnic groups began pushing westward. Their arrival triggered a chain reaction that reshaped Europe. Germanic tribes such as the Goths, Vandals, and Alans were driven into Roman territory, seeking refuge or conquest. Rome's borders, once carefully regulated, were now under constant strain. This period became known to later historians as the Age of Migrations, a time when entire peoples were on the move and political boundaries were in flux. By the early 400s, the Huns had established themselves in the Carpathian Basin, roughly in modern-day Central Europe. From this strategic heartland, they could strike in multiple directions, toward the Balkans, the Rhine frontier, and deep into Roman territory. They were no longer scattered raiders. They were becoming an empire. At the same time, Rome faced crises from within. Tax systems were failing. Urban centers were shrinking. Military recruitment relied increasingly on foreign mercenaries. Loyalty was fragile. Authority was contested. The balance of power that had sustained Roman dominance for centuries was breaking down. It was into this unstable and uncertain world that Attila was born. He would grow up in a frontier society shaped by warfare, diplomacy, and constant negotiation with Rome. He would witness firsthand both the strength and the vulnerability of imperial power. And he would learn how fear, reputation, and strategic violence could achieve what armies alone could not. Within a generation, this child of the steppe would become the most feared ruler in Europe. But before he was known as the Scourge of God, before Roman emperors paid him in gold, before cities trembled at his approach, Attila was simply one figure among many in a rising Hunnic confederation. To understand how he would reshape history, we must first understand where he came from. And that story begins with the origins of the Huns themselves. The early history of the Huns remains one of the most challenging subjects in ancient scholarship. Unlike the Romans, the Huns left no written records of their own. They did not preserve official histories, royal chronicles, or literary traditions. Almost everything known about them comes from Roman observers, such as diplomats, soldiers, and historians who viewed Hunnic society from the outside. As a result, our understanding is partial, but not without reliable foundations. Most modern historians agree that the Huns originated in the Eurasian steppe, a vast belt of grasslands stretching from Central Asia to Eastern Europe. For centuries, this region had produced nomadic societies built around mobility, herding, and mounted warfare. These peoples lived in portable felt tents, moved seasonally with their livestock, and depended on horses for transport, hunting, and combat. From childhood, boys learned to ride and shoot. Warfare was not a profession, it was a way of life. By the late 4th century, Hunnic groups had moved westward into Eastern Europe, settling around the Black Sea and eventually in the Carpathian Basin. There, they absorbed and dominated neighboring tribes, forming a powerful multi-ethnic confederation. It was within this expanding world that Attila the Hun was born, probably around the year 406 AD. The exact location of his birth is unknown. What is clear is that he was born into the ruling elite of Hunnic society. His father, Munzuk, was a prominent noble closely related to the royal house. Munzuk's brothers, Rugila, also known as Ruga, and Octor, were among the most powerful Hunnic leaders of their time. Rugila emerged in the 420s as the most influential Hunnic leader of his generation. Through a combination of force and negotiation, he unified many previously independent Hunnic and non-Hunnic groups under his authority. These included Hunnic clans, Gothic tribes, Alan warriors, and other steppe and frontier peoples. Rather than ruling through direct administration, Rugila created a system of overlordship. Subordinate leaders retained local control but owed military service and loyalty to the central Hunnic leadership. This flexible structure allowed the Huns to expand rapidly without becoming overextended. At the same time, Rugila skillfully exploited Roman weakness. During this period, the Eastern Roman Empire was ruled by Theodosius II, whose government struggled to manage multiple threats along its long frontiers. Civil administration was overstretched, military resources were limited, and political stability depended heavily on compromise. Recognizing Rome's vulnerability, Rugila applied sustained pressure along the Danube frontier. Hunnic forces raided Roman territories, disrupted trade routes, and threatened major cities. These actions were rarely random. They were carefully calculated to maximize political pressure. Rather than risk large-scale war, Constantinople chose negotiation. The result was a series of treaties that established a pattern which would later define Attila's rule. Under these agreements, Rome agreed to pay large annual tributes in gold, return escaped Hunnic subjects, restrict alliances with Hunnic enemies, and grant trading privileges. These payments were, in effect, protection money. They enriched the Hunnic leadership and funded further military expansion. The gold flowing from Constantinople into Hunnic hands strengthened the ruling elite and reinforced their authority over subordinate tribes. Meanwhile, the Hunnic army was becoming increasingly formidable. Its core strength lay in mounted archers, highly mobile cavalry capable of striking quickly and withdrawing before enemies could respond. These troops were supported by heavier cavalry and allied forces drawn from subject peoples. Hunnic commanders emphasized speed, surprise, psychological warfare, feigned retreats, and coordinated mass attacks. Roman legions, designed for slower and more structured forms of combat, struggled to counter these methods. Raids were often devastating. Villages were destroyed. Crops were burned. Populations were displaced. Even when Rome avoided major battlefield defeat, the long-term economic damage was severe. For young Attila, this was a crucial period of apprenticeship. He observed how his uncle transformed military pressure into political leverage. He saw how fear could be converted into gold. He learned that Rome's greatest weakness was not its armies, but its dependence on stability. When stability was threatened, Rome was willing to pay almost any price to restore it. Attila also gained experience in leadership during these years. He likely participated in campaigns, negotiations, and court councils. He would have watched how Rugila balanced competing interests within the Hunnic Confederation and punished disloyalty. Power, he learned, had to be constantly reinforced. By the early 430s, the Hunnic Empire stretched from the Black Sea region across much of Central Europe. It controlled key river routes, migration corridors, and trade networks. No other non-Roman power in Europe rivaled its reach. When Rugila died around 434 AD, he left behind a unified, wealthy, and militarized empire. Instead of passing power to a single successor, leadership was divided between Rugila's two nephews, Attila the Hun and Bleda. This arrangement reflected long-standing traditions within steppe societies, where power was often shared among members of the ruling family to prevent immediate internal conflict. It also acknowledged the political realities of a vast and diverse empire that required careful management. Attila and Bleda were still relatively young when they assumed authority, likely in their late 20s or early 30s. Yet they inherited a highly organized political system, substantial military resources, and a steady flow of Roman tribute. Their first priority was to secure their legitimacy. Subordinate leaders, tribal chiefs, and allied commanders needed reassurance that the new rulers could maintain stability and protect their interests. Any sign of weakness could invite rebellion. The brothers moved quickly to demonstrate unity and strength. One of their earliest major actions was to renegotiate relations with the Eastern Roman Empire. In 435 AD, Hunnic and Roman representatives met at the city of Margus on the Danube frontier. The resulting agreement, known as the Treaty of Margus, formalized existing arrangements and imposed even harsher terms on Rome. Under the treaty, the Eastern Roman government agreed to double its annual tribute payments, return all fugitive Hunnic subjects, prohibit alliances with enemies of the Huns, and allow regulated trade between the two powers. For Constantinople, these concessions were costly, but they were considered preferable to war. At the time, the Eastern Empire was focused on threats in the east, including tensions with Persia, and lacked the resources for a prolonged conflict on the Danube frontier. For Attila and Bleda, the treaty was a major success. It confirmed their authority, it increased their wealth, and it reinforced the perception that Rome could be compelled to submit. During the following years, the brothers ruled jointly over an empire that stretched across much of Central Europe. Evidence suggests that their responsibilities were divided. Bleda appears to have taken a leading role in internal administration and relations with subject peoples. Attila, meanwhile, focused more heavily on foreign policy, military strategy, and diplomacy with Rome. This division of labor helped maintain stability in the short term. Together, they supervised campaigns against rebellious tribes, managed tribute systems, and maintained the loyalty of powerful allies. Their court became a center of political negotiation, where Roman envoys, barbarian chiefs, and military commanders competed for influence. Roman diplomats who encountered the brothers during this period noted clear differences in personality. Later sources suggest that Bleda was more inclined toward traditional aristocratic privilege and ceremonial authority. Attila, by contrast, was already developing a reputation for discipline, restraint, and strategic thinking. He dressed simply. He avoided unnecessary displays of wealth, and he focused on efficiency and control. These traits enhanced his authority among warriors and commanders who valued strength and reliability over luxury. Despite their outward cooperation, the system of dual rule contained inherent tensions. Shared power always risked rivalry. As the empire expanded and its wealth increased, so did the stakes of leadership. Control over tribute, military appointments, and diplomatic strategy offered immense personal influence. By the early 440s, the shared rule between Attila the Hun and Bleda was becoming increasingly unstable. Although the brothers continued to govern together in name, real power was shifting. Attila's influence within the Hunnic Empire had grown steadily. He controlled key military forces, managed relations with Rome, and cultivated loyalty among leading commanders and tribal chiefs. Many within the Confederation now looked to him as the true center of authority. Bleda, by contrast, appears to have been losing ground. While he retained formal status, he exercised less visible control over diplomacy and military strategy. Ancient sources suggest that he was more concerned with personal prestige and courtly privilege than with direct leadership in war and politics. In an empire built on strength, discipline, and fear, this imbalance mattered. The system of dual rule, which had once provided stability, was becoming a liability. Rival factions within the empire could exploit divisions. Subordinate leaders might challenge authority. Roman diplomats could attempt to play one brother against the other. For Attila, this situation was unacceptable. Sometime around 445 AD, Bleda died under suspicious circumstances. According to later accounts, he was killed by Attila himself, possibly during a hunting expedition. The details are unclear, and no contemporary Roman source witnessed the event directly. However, multiple independent traditions agree that Attila was responsible, either directly or through intermediaries. While absolute certainty is impossible, most modern historians consider fratricide the most likely explanation. In steppe politics, such acts were not unusual. Power struggles within ruling families were common, and eliminating rivals was often seen as a practical necessity rather than a moral crime. Stability of rule took precedence over personal bonds. With Bleda's death, Attila became the undisputed ruler of the Hunnic Empire. For the first time, all military, diplomatic, and political authority was concentrated in a single individual. This marked a turning point. No longer constrained by shared leadership, Attila could now pursue his ambitions without compromise. Decisions could be made quickly. Campaigns could be coordinated on a massive scale. Negotiations with Rome could be conducted from a position of unified strength. Almost immediately, his style of rule became more centralized and more demanding. He strengthened his control over subordinate kings and tribal leaders. Loyalty was rewarded generously, often with gold, land, and prestige. Disobedience, however, was punished swiftly and brutally. Fear and favor became the twin pillars of his authority. At the royal court, Attila maintained a carefully managed image. The Roman historian Priscus, who later visited his headquarters, described a ruler who lived modestly compared to his followers. While his nobles drank from silver and gold vessels, Attila used wooden cups. While others dressed in elaborate garments, he wore plain clothing. This simplicity was deliberate. It reinforced his image as a disciplined warrior king rather than a decadent monarch. It reminded his followers that he ruled through strength and merit, not luxury. At the same time, Attila controlled immense wealth. The gold extracted from Rome through tribute and diplomacy flowed through his court. He redistributed it strategically to secure loyalty and finance military campaigns. Every major leader within the empire depended, directly or indirectly, on his favor. With power consolidated, Attila turned his full attention outward. The Eastern Roman Empire, which had long relied on treaties and payments to maintain peace, now faced a ruler who was more ambitious, more organized, and more ruthless than any of his predecessors. By the mid-440s, relations between Attila the Hun and the Eastern Roman Empire were entering a dangerous new phase. With his authority now fully consolidated, Attila no longer needed to balance internal rivals or compromise with co-rulers. He was free to pursue a more aggressive and uncompromising foreign policy. His primary focus turned toward Constantinople. The Eastern Roman Empire was still ruled by Theodosius II, whose government relied heavily on diplomacy and financial payments to manage frontier threats. For decades, Roman officials had believed that tribute could contain Hunnic aggression. Attila intended to prove them wrong. Tensions first escalated over unresolved provisions of earlier treaties. Roman authorities were accused of harboring Hunnic fugitives, violating trade restrictions, and failing to meet tribute obligations in full. These disputes were not accidental misunderstandings. They provided Attila with a legal and diplomatic justification for war. In 441 AD, he acted. While much of the Eastern Roman army was deployed in the Mediterranean to confront the Vandals in North Africa, Hunnic forces crossed the Danube in force. The timing was deliberate. Attila had chosen a moment when Roman defenses were weakest. The invasion was swift and devastating. Hunnic armies advanced deep into the Balkans, capturing and destroying major cities along the frontier. Important centers such as Viminatium, Singidunum, and Nisus fell in rapid succession. Roman garrisons were overwhelmed. Civilian populations fled or were taken captive. For the first time in decades, the Eastern Empire faced the prospect of sustained large-scale invasion from the north. The Roman response was slow and uncertain. Resources were limited. Reinforcements had to be recalled from distant theaters. Emergency taxes were imposed. Diplomats were dispatched to negotiate even as fighting continued. By 442 AD, pressure from Attila forced Constantinople to seek peace. A new agreement was concluded that dramatically increased Roman obligations. Tribute payments were raised, and substantial arrears were demanded in compensation for past violations. Large quantities of gold were transferred to the Hunnic court. The settlement temporarily halted the invasion, but it did not resolve the underlying conflict. Attila had learned something crucial. He had learned that even the fortified and wealthy Eastern Empire could be brought to the brink of collapse through coordinated pressure and timing. He had learned that Roman diplomacy ultimately rested on fear of destruction. Peace, he now understood, was merely another weapon. During the following years, Attila maintained constant pressure along the frontier. Raids continued intermittently. Roman border defenses were probed and tested. Diplomatic envoys were summoned repeatedly to his court, where they were forced to negotiate from a position of weakness. Meanwhile, within Constantinople, anxiety was growing. The government invested heavily in fortifications, repairing and strengthening the massive land walls that protected the city. Military reforms were attempted. Emergency reserves were accumulated. Yet officials knew that their security depended largely on Attila's restraint. That restraint would not last. Although new treaties had followed the first Balkan invasions, both sides accused the other of violating their terms. Roman officials complained about continued Hunnic raids. Attila accused the empire of withholding tribute, sheltering fugitives, and interfering with Hunnic allies. At the center of these tensions stood an earlier agreement, the Treaty of Margus, signed in 435 AD. This treaty had originally been negotiated between Attila, his brother Bleda, and representatives of Theodosius II. It had established the framework for peace, trade, and tribute along the Danube frontier. One of its lesser-known provisions required Roman authorities to respect Hunnic burial sites located near the border. According to later accounts, a Christian bishop from Margus violated this clause by crossing into Hunnic territory and desecrating royal tombs. Whether this act was deliberate or careless remains uncertain. What mattered was its political effect. Attila treated it as a grave insult. He demanded the bishop's surrender and full compensation. When Roman officials hesitated, he declared the treaty void. This incident provided him with the pretext he needed. In 447 AD, Attila launched his most devastating campaign against the Eastern Roman Empire. Leading a massive multi-ethnic army, he crossed the Danube and advanced rapidly through the Balkans. Roman defenses, already weakened by earlier wars and financial strain, collapsed under the pressure. City after city fell. Serdica, Philippopolis, and Arcadiopolis were captured or destroyed. Even well-fortified centers proved unable to resist sustained Hunnic assault. The countryside was systematically devastated, with farms burned, populations displaced, and infrastructure ruined. The scale of destruction was unprecedented. For the first time, Attila's forces penetrated deep into imperial territory, reaching as far as southern Greece. No region north of the Aegean Sea was truly safe. The Eastern Roman army attempted to resist. A major confrontation took place near the Utus River in modern Bulgaria. Despite determined resistance, Roman forces were defeated. Their losses further exposed the empire's vulnerability. By this point, the situation had become critical. Constantinople itself was threatened. Although the city's massive land walls prevented direct assault, panic spread throughout the capital. Refugees flooded in. Food prices soared. Public morale declined. The government feared that prolonged war could trigger internal collapse. Facing disaster, the imperial court sought peace. In 448 AD, Roman envoys were sent to Attila's headquarters to negotiate. Among them was Priscus, whose detailed account remains one of the most valuable sources on Attila's reign. The terms imposed by Attila were harsh. Tribute was tripled. Large arrears were demanded. A wide buffer zone south of the Danube was evacuated. Roman border defenses were dismantled. Hostages were exchanged. The Eastern Empire effectively acknowledged Hunnic supremacy in the region. For Attila, this was the peak of his power in the east. He had defeated Roman armies, devastated provinces, and forced one of the world's greatest states to submit through negotiation rather than conquest. Yet this victory also revealed the limits of his strategy. The Eastern Empire, though wounded, had not collapsed. Its capital remained secure. Its administrative system continued to function. Over time, it would recover. Attila recognized this reality. Constantinople could be bled, intimidated, and exploited, but not easily destroyed. If he wished to expand further, he would need to look elsewhere. After the massive invasion of 447 AD, much of the Balkan frontier lay in ruins. Fortresses were damaged, garrisons depleted, and civilian populations displaced. Roads, bridges, and supply depots had been destroyed, making recovery slow and uncertain. Rather than allowing the empire time to rebuild, Attila maintained constant pressure. Hunnic forces continued to cross the Danube at will. They struck at repaired towns, newly settled villages, and restored military posts. Any sign of Roman recovery was met with renewed attack. This strategy served multiple purposes. It kept Roman armies off balance. It discouraged resettlement and reconstruction. And it reinforced the message that imperial authority had collapsed in the region. The psychological impact was as important as the physical destruction. For many inhabitants of the Balkans, Roman protection had become meaningless. Entire communities migrated southward or sought refuge in fortified cities. Agricultural production declined. Trade networks collapsed. Tax revenues fell sharply. The Eastern Roman government struggled to respond. Under Theodosius II, officials attempted emergency reforms. New taxes were levied to finance defenses. Recruitment efforts were intensified. Fortifications were repaired wherever possible. Most importantly, massive resources were invested in strengthening the walls of Constantinople. Engineers reinforced towers, deepened moats, and improved supply systems. The capital was transformed into one of the most formidable fortified cities in the ancient world. These measures reflected a strategic shift. Roman leaders no longer believed they could reliably defend the Danube frontier. Instead, they focused on preserving the core of the empire while sacrificing peripheral regions. For Attila, this represented a partial victory. The Balkans had effectively been neutralized as a stable Roman province. They no longer served as a reliable source of revenue, manpower, or security for Constantinople. Yet the empire itself endured. Despite immense losses, the Eastern Roman administrative system continued to function. Taxation resumed in safer regions. Trade recovered along protected routes. Military units were reorganized. Attila had damaged Rome severely, but he had not destroyed it. During this period, diplomatic exchanges continued alongside warfare. Roman envoys regularly traveled to Attila's court, bringing tribute and negotiating minor disputes. These meetings were carefully staged displays of Hunnic dominance. According to Priscus, Roman diplomats were forced to wait for hours, sometimes days, before being received. They were reminded constantly of their inferior position. Attila used these encounters to reinforce his reputation as an unchallengeable ruler. He spoke calmly. He made precise demands. He showed little emotion. His authority was expressed through restraint rather than spectacle. By the early 450s, however, the strategic situation was changing. The Balkans had been exhausted. Continued campaigns there yielded diminishing returns. Tribute payments were becoming more difficult to extract. Roman defenses around the capital had become nearly impregnable. Further expansion in the east promised high cost and limited reward. By the early 450s, the relationship between Attila the Hun and the Eastern Roman Empire had settled into a tense and highly ritualized pattern. War and peace no longer existed as clear opposites. Instead, they functioned as alternating tools within a single system of pressure, negotiation, and calculated intimidation. At the center of this system stood Constantinople, the political and administrative heart of the Eastern Empire. Protected by massive walls and vast resources, the city had survived Attila's campaigns. Yet its survival came at a high cost. Peace was maintained not through military superiority, but through diplomacy supported by gold. The imperial government, under Theodosius II, recognized that direct confrontation with Attila was risky and unpredictable. Roman leaders, therefore, sought to manage him through a combination of tribute, formal treaties, and constant negotiation. Envoys were dispatched regularly to Attila's court. They carried letters, gifts, and large quantities of gold. They were instructed to avoid provoking him, to flatter his authority, and to secure temporary stability whenever possible. These diplomatic missions were among the most delicate assignments in the Roman world. A single misjudged word could reignite war. Attila insisted on full payment of tribute, strict enforcement of treaty terms, and complete Roman compliance with his instructions. Any deviation, however small, was treated as a potential act of hostility. Through this approach, he transformed diplomacy into an extension of warfare. Negotiation was not a search for compromise. It was a mechanism for enforcing dominance. At the same time, the Eastern Roman court pursued its own strategies. While publicly honoring treaties, some officials quietly explored ways to weaken Attila's position. They attempted to build alliances with subject peoples, encouraged defections, and gathered intelligence on Hunnic movements. In one notable incident, elements within the imperial administration supported a failed plot to assassinate Attila through bribed intermediaries. When the conspiracy was uncovered, Attila responded not with immediate war, but with calculated humiliation. He confronted Roman envoys, exposed the plot, and demanded further concessions. The message was clear. Even Rome's secret schemes were under his control. This episode demonstrated both Attila's strength and his restraint. He understood that maintaining pressure through diplomacy was often more effective than launching another costly campaign. Throughout this period, relations between the two powers remained deeply unequal. Rome negotiated from fear. Attila negotiated from a position of confidence. Yet the Eastern Empire was not entirely passive. After the death of Theodosius II in 450 AD, a new emperor, Marcian, came to power. He adopted a firmer stance, refusing to continue large-scale tribute payments and strengthening military defenses. This marked the beginning of a subtle shift. Constantinople was becoming more resilient. Its finances were stabilizing. Its army was reorganizing. Its fortifications were complete. Attila recognized that the balance in the east was slowly changing. While he remained powerful, the easy victories and enormous payments of earlier years were becoming harder to secure. Diplomacy with Constantinople had reached its practical limits. If he wished to achieve greater wealth, prestige, and lasting influence, he would need to seek new opportunities beyond the Eastern Empire. Once again, his attention turned west. While Attila the Hun was pressuring the Eastern Roman Empire through war and diplomacy, he was also methodically strengthening his control over Central Europe. This process was less visible than the Balkan campaigns, but it was equally important to his rise. The Hunnic Empire was not a unified nation-state. It was a vast confederation of peoples, including Huns, Goths, Gepids, Alans, Syrians, Rugians, and many others. Each group retained its own leaders, customs, and internal structures. Attila's authority depended on his ability to bind these diverse communities into a functioning political system. He achieved this through a careful balance of coercion, reward, and personal leadership. Subordinate kings and chiefs were allowed to rule their own peoples, but only so long as they remained loyal. They were required to provide troops for campaigns, attend royal assemblies, and accept Attila's arbitration in major disputes. Those who complied were rewarded with gold, prestige, and protection. Those who resisted were removed. Over time, Attila replaced unreliable leaders with individuals personally loyal to him. This created a network of dependent rulers whose power flowed directly from his favor. Military integration was central to this system. Warriors from subject tribes were incorporated into Hunnic armies and placed under trusted commanders. Campaigns were deliberately mixed, ensuring that no single ethnic group could dominate the military. This prevented rebellion and strengthened central control. Attila also used marriage alliances, hostage exchanges, and ceremonial gifts to reinforce loyalty. Elite families were tied to his court through personal relationships and shared interests. The result was a highly flexible but resilient political structure. Geographically, Attila's power base lay in the Carpathian Basin, an area that included parts of modern Hungary, Romania, Serbia, and surrounding regions. This region offered fertile grazing land, river access, and strategic mobility. From this center, Hunnic forces could move rapidly toward the Balkans, the Rhine, or northern Italy. Control of trade routes further strengthened Attila's position. Major rivers such as the Danube, Tisza, and Sava connected his territory to Roman markets and northern Europe. Goods, tribute, and prisoners flowed through these corridors. Attila regulated this movement carefully, ensuring that wealth passed through his hands. Roman merchants and diplomats who traveled through Hunnic territory required his permission and protection. This gave him additional leverage in negotiations. Politically, Attila presented himself not merely as a warlord, but as a supreme arbiter. Disputes between tribes were brought before his court. Legal decisions were issued in his name. Punishments and rewards were administered publicly. This reinforced the idea that ultimate authority rested with him alone. The court itself became a focal point of power. According to Priscus, Attila's headquarters functioned as both a military camp and an administrative center. Delegations from across Europe gathered there to seek favor, settle conflicts, and negotiate terms. Despite the simplicity of his personal lifestyle, Attila presided over a complex political system. By the early 450s, his control over Central Europe was more complete than that of any previous Hunnic ruler. No major tribe in the region could challenge him openly. No significant alliance could form without his knowledge. No large-scale military movement could occur without his approval. This consolidation gave him unprecedented strategic freedom. He no longer needed to focus on internal security. His rear was stable. His supply networks were secure. His authority was unquestioned. With Central Europe firmly under his control, Attila stood at the height of his power. He now commanded the largest and most cohesive non-Roman political force in Europe. The next stage of his career would not be about consolidation. It would be about conquest. Unlike its eastern counterpart, the Western Empire was politically fragile and militarily overstretched. Its resources were limited, its territories fragmented, and its leadership frequently divided. Although it still claimed the legacy of Rome, its ability to enforce authority was steadily eroding. In the mid-5th century, the Western Empire was dominated by one powerful figure, Flavius Aetius. Aetius served as the empire's chief military commander and de facto ruler. For decades, he had managed frontier threats through diplomacy, alliances, and selective warfare. He had even spent time among the Huns in his youth, giving him rare insight into their society and tactics. Earlier in his career, Aetius had relied on Hunnic mercenaries to defeat rival Roman factions and suppress rebellions. This had created a complex relationship between Rome and the Huns, based on both cooperation and mutual suspicion. Attila was well aware of this history. He understood that Aetius was one of the few Roman leaders capable of organizing effective resistance. Any major Western campaign would inevitably involve confronting him. At the same time, internal instability within the Western Empire created new opportunities. Emperors changed frequently. Provincial governors acted independently. Tax revenues declined. Many regions depended on barbarian federate troops rather than Roman legions. Gaul, northern Italy, and parts of the Rhine frontier were particularly vulnerable. Attila began testing Western defenses through diplomacy and indirect pressure. He demanded payments, interfered in disputes among Germanic tribes, and positioned himself as an arbiter of Western politics. Some rulers sought his support against rivals, further expanding his influence. In several cases, Attila intervened in succession disputes among subject and allied peoples, ensuring that leaders loyal to him came to power. This extended his reach into Roman client networks. Relations with the Western court became increasingly strained. The emperor at this time, Valentinian III, relied heavily on Aetius for security. Without strong personal authority, Valentinian struggled to control powerful generals and court factions. This political weakness limited the empire's ability to respond decisively to external threats. Meanwhile, Attila cultivated his reputation in the West. Stories of his Balkan campaigns, his wealth, and his dominance over Constantinople circulated widely. Many Western elites regarded him with fear and reluctant respect. Some even viewed him as an inevitable force of history. By the late 440s, Attila had established diplomatic channels with Western officials, Germanic kings, and regional leaders. His network of contacts extended from the Danube to the Atlantic. He was no longer merely an Eastern menace. He had become a pan-European power broker. Yet Attila still lacked a clear justification for a full-scale invasion of the Western Empire. Open war required more than ambition. It required legitimacy, opportunity, and strategic advantage. All three would soon present themselves in a single, extraordinary episode. In 450 AD, a private act of desperation within the imperial court provided Attila the Hun with the political opportunity he had long awaited. At the center of this episode was Justigrada Honoria, the sister of Western Emperor Valentinian III. Honoria was a member of the ruling Theodosian dynasty and held the prestigious title of Augusta. In theory, this status granted her honor and influence. In practice, her life was tightly controlled by her brother and the imperial court. Forbidden from marrying freely and excluded from political authority, Honoria grew increasingly frustrated with her confinement. By 449 AD, her situation had worsened. After becoming involved in a secret relationship with a palace official, she was placed under strict supervision and forced into an unwanted engagement with a Roman senator. This arrangement was designed to remove her permanently from political life. Facing isolation and loss of status, Honoria took a remarkable step. She secretly sent a message to Attila. Along with her letter, she dispatched her personal ring, a powerful symbol of imperial authority. In the message, she asked for his help in freeing her from her brother's control. Whether she intended a formal marriage proposal is unclear. Her primary aim appears to have been political rescue rather than romantic union. Attila, however, interpreted the message to his advantage. He treated the ring as proof of a marriage offer. Publicly, he declared that Honoria was his betrothed and that he was therefore entitled to her inheritance. He demanded half of the Western Roman Empire as her dowry. From a legal standpoint, this claim had no foundation in Roman law. From a political standpoint, it was brilliant. Attila now possessed a plausible justification for intervention in Western affairs. He could present himself not as a foreign invader, but as a legitimate claimant defending his bride's rights. The Western court reacted with alarm. Valentinian III immediately rejected Attila's claim. Honoria was placed under even stricter control, and her correspondence was monitored. Officials attempted to minimize the incident and deny its significance. But it was too late. Attila had seized upon the affair as a diplomatic weapon. He sent envoys demanding recognition of the engagement and fulfillment of the dowry. He insisted that his rights be respected. He warned that refusal would be treated as an act of hostility. At the same time, he began preparing militarily. Troops were assembled. Alliances were activated. Supply routes were secured. Intelligence was gathered on Western defenses. The Honoria affair also deepened divisions within the Western Empire. Some officials urged accommodation. Others favored resistance. Aetius worked urgently to coordinate defenses and rally allies. Meanwhile, Attila presented himself as patient and reasonable. He claimed to seek only justice. But behind the language of legality lay the reality of power. The affair gave him moral cover, diplomatic leverage, and a rallying cause. For the first time, he could portray his Western campaign as lawful, not merely opportunistic. By 451 AD, negotiations had failed. Neither side was willing to yield. The stage was set for one of the largest and most decisive confrontations of the 5th century. In the spring of 451 AD, Attila the Hun launched his most ambitious military campaign. For the first time, he directed the full weight of his empire toward the heart of the Western Roman world. His target was Gaul. At this time, Gaul was one of the most important remaining provinces of the Western Roman Empire. It contained major cities, productive farmland, and key transportation routes linking Italy, Spain, and the Rhine frontier. It was also politically fragmented. Roman authority coexisted uneasily with Germanic kingdoms, including the Visigoths, Burgundians, and Franks. Loyalty to the imperial government was inconsistent, and local leaders often acted independently. Attila exploited this division. He assembled a vast coalition army composed of Huns and subject peoples from across Central and Eastern Europe. This force included Gepids, Ostrogoths, Rhodians, Syrians, and other allied groups, all bound to him through obligation and reward. Contemporary sources exaggerate the size of this army, but there is no doubt that it was one of the largest field forces assembled in 5th century Europe. In early 451, Attila crossed the Rhine and advanced into northern Gaul. His march was swift and destructive. Cities and towns along his route were attacked or forced to surrender. Metz was captured and sacked. Reims, Amiens, and other centers were threatened. Civilian populations fled in panic. The advance followed major river valleys and road networks, allowing rapid movement and efficient supply. The psychological impact was enormous. For many in Gaul, it seemed that no power could resist the Huns. Roman resistance, however, was already forming. At the center of this effort stood Flavius Aetius, the Western Empire's most capable commander. Recognizing that Roman forces alone were insufficient, Aetius pursued a strategy of coalition building. He negotiated alliances with Germanic rulers who also feared Attila's dominance. Most importantly, he secured the support of the Visigothic king, Theodoric I, whose kingdom was based in southern Gaul. The Visigoths provided experienced warriors and strategic depth. Other allies included Burgundians, Franks, and local Roman militias. Together, they formed a defensive coalition unlike anything previously assembled in the West. As Attila advanced, Aetius carefully avoided premature confrontation. He shadowed the Hunnic army, protected key routes, and prevented it from securing permanent bases. Skirmishes occurred, but both sides conserved their strength for a decisive encounter. The turning point came at the city of Orleans. Attila laid siege to the town, intending to secure a stronghold on the Loire River. Orleans resisted stubbornly, buying valuable time. Before the city could fall, Aetius and his allies arrived with the main coalition army. Caught between resistance and approaching enemies, Attila lifted the siege and withdrew eastward toward open plains better suited to cavalry warfare. Both armies now sought favorable ground. In the summer of 451 AD, two of the most powerful military coalitions of the 5th century confronted each other in northeastern Gaul. On one side stood Attila the Hun, commanding the combined forces of the Hunnic Empire and its subject allies. On the other stood the Western Roman general Flavius Aetius, leading a diverse coalition of Romans, Visigoths, Burgundians, Franks, and other federate troops. The meeting place, known in Roman sources as the Catalaunian Plains, was likely located near modern-day Chalon-sur-Marne. The exact location remains debated, but the region offered wide open terrain suitable for large-scale maneuver and cavalry combat. Both commanders understood the stakes. For Attila, victory would open the way to permanent domination of Gaul and possibly northern Italy. For Aetius and his allies, defeat could mean the collapse of Roman authority in the West. The armies met in late June 451. Ancient historians describe a vast and chaotic battlefield, crowded with tens of thousands of warriors. Although precise numbers are impossible to verify, it was undoubtedly one of the largest battles fought in late antiquity. The struggle centered on a low ridge that dominated the surrounding plain. Control of this high ground was crucial. Both sides rushed to secure it, and fierce fighting erupted almost immediately. After heavy losses, the Roman-Visigothic coalition succeeded in occupying the ridge first, gaining a significant tactical advantage. Attila placed his Hunnic cavalry in the center, supported by allied infantry and mounted troops on the flanks. Aetius positioned Roman units on one wing, and the Visigoths under King Theodoric I on the other. Repeated charges and countercharges swept across the field. Hunnic horse archers attempted to break enemy formations with missile fire. Roman and Visigothic troops responded with close-quarters combat. Discipline, cohesion, and endurance became decisive factors. During the height of the battle, Theodoric I was killed, either trampled by cavalry or struck down in combat. His death temporarily destabilized the Visigothic line. However, his son, Thorismund, rallied the warriors and led a renewed assault that pushed back the Hunnic flank. As night fell, neither side had achieved complete victory. Casualties were enormous. Contemporary writers described the battlefield as covered with the dead. Both armies were exhausted. Attila withdrew his forces into a fortified wagon camp, a defensive enclosure formed from linked wagons and equipment. From there, he prepared for a possible final assault the next day. Roman and Visigothic leaders debated their next move. Although Attila had been checked, his army remained dangerous. Aetius, wary of strengthening the Visigoths too much, advised caution. He encouraged Thorismund to return quickly to secure his throne rather than pursue total destruction of the Huns. As a result, the coalition did not press its advantage. Within days, Attila was able to withdraw eastward in good order. Strategically, the battle was a setback for him. He had failed to conquer Gaul. His aura of invincibility had been damaged. His losses were heavy. Yet he had not been destroyed. His core forces remained intact. His empire remained stable. The Battle of the Catalaunian Plains, therefore, ended not with a decisive victory, but with mutual exhaustion. It halted Attila's western advance. But it did not end his ambitions. In 452 CE, Attila the Hun launched one of the most dramatic and consequential campaigns of his career, the invasion of Italy itself. This campaign marked the final major western offensive of the Hunnic Empire and brought Attila closer than any foreign ruler in centuries to threatening the heart of the Western Roman world. The immediate context of this invasion lay in the weakened state of the Western Roman Empire. After years of internal instability, military exhaustion, and economic decline, imperial authority in the West had become fragile. The empire had struggled to recover from earlier Hunnic attacks in Gaul, and its defenses along the Alpine frontier were thin. With much of its military strength depleted, Italy presented an opportunity for Attila to press his advantage. Crossing the Julian Alps in the spring of 452, Attila's forces entered northeastern Italy and advanced toward the important fortified city of Aquileia. Aquileia was one of the strongest cities in the region and a key gateway into the Italian peninsula. After a prolonged and destructive siege, the city fell to the Huns. Contemporary sources describe its destruction as so thorough that it was said to have been erased from the landscape. Archaeological evidence confirms severe devastation, though later rebuilding did occur. The fall of Aquileia sent shockwaves throughout northern Italy. Refugees fled southward, and many sought safety in the marshlands of the Adriatic coast, contributing to the early development of settlements that would later become Venice. Attila's army continued its advance, capturing and plundering several major cities, including Milan, which had once served as an imperial residence, and Pavia, then known as Ticinum. These conquests demonstrated both the reach of Attila's power and the inability of the Western Empire to mount effective resistance. The Roman general Flavius Aetius, who had previously helped stop Attila in Gaul, lacked sufficient troops to confront the Huns in open battle. Many of Rome's former allies had been weakened, and the empire could no longer rely on large federate armies to defend Italy. As Attila moved southward through the Po Valley, fear spread rapidly. The imperial court, led by Emperor Valentinian III, had already withdrawn to Ravenna, a heavily fortified city protected by marshes and waterways. Rome itself, though still symbolically powerful, was militarily vulnerable and poorly defended. By mid-452, Attila stood poised to advance toward Rome. His forces had devastated much of northern Italy, and no substantial Roman army blocked his path. For many contemporaries, it appeared that the ancient capital might soon suffer the same fate as Aquileia. At this critical moment, the Western Roman government turned to diplomacy. An embassy was dispatched to negotiate with Attila, led by Pope Leo I, accompanied by high-ranking imperial officials. The meeting took place somewhere along the river Mincio in northern Italy. The precise details of the negotiations are not fully recorded, and later accounts embellished the event with religious symbolism. Medieval tradition claimed that divine intervention persuaded Attila to withdraw. Modern historians, however, emphasize more practical considerations. By 452, Attila's army was suffering from supply shortages, disease, and exhaustion. Northern Italy had been heavily looted, limiting available resources. At the same time, reports indicated that Eastern Roman forces were threatening Hunnic territories in the Balkans, placing pressure on Attila's rear. It is likely that the Roman embassy offered renewed tribute and diplomatic concessions, making withdrawal financially advantageous. Combined with logistical difficulties and strategic concerns, these factors made continued advance toward Rome increasingly risky. Shortly after the meeting, Attila ordered his forces to retreat northward across the Alps. Italy was spared a direct assault on its capital, but the damage inflicted on the northern provinces was immense. Cities lay in ruins, agricultural production was disrupted, and population displacement was widespread. The Italian campaign represented the peak of Attila's western expansion. Never before had he penetrated so deeply into the Roman heartland. Yet it also revealed the limits of Hunnic power. Despite overwhelming force and repeated victories, Attila was unable to secure lasting control over Italy or force the complete submission of the Western Empire. The retreat from Italy was not a sudden collapse, but a calculated and organized withdrawal. Attila's forces moved northward across the Alps, retracing their path through devastated territories. Northern Italy had already been stripped of much of its food supply and wealth, making continued occupation impractical. Prolonged presence in the region would have exposed his army to starvation, disease, and growing resistance. By late 452, the Hunnic host had largely returned to the Danube basin, where Attila's main power base was located. Although his Italian campaign had not ended with the capture of Rome, it had nonetheless been highly profitable. Vast quantities of treasure, captives, and tribute had been extracted from Roman territories, reinforcing Attila's reputation as the dominant ruler of Central and Eastern Europe. Once back in his core territories, Attila turned his attention once more to the Eastern Roman Empire. For much of his reign, relations with Constantinople had revolved around tribute payments and diplomatic pressure. Earlier emperors, including Theodosius II, had agreed to pay large sums of gold to keep the Huns at bay. These arrangements had enriched Attila and strengthened his political leverage. However, by the early 450s, the political situation in the east had changed. In 450 CE, Theodosius II died and was succeeded by Marcian, a ruler who adopted a more confrontational stance toward the Huns. Marcian refused to continue the costly tribute payments and focused on strengthening the empire's defenses. This shift posed a direct challenge to Attila's authority. Tribute from the Eastern Empire had been a major source of income and prestige. Its cancellation threatened not only his finances, but also his standing among his followers, who expected continued rewards from Roman wealth. In response, Attila began preparations for renewed operations in the Balkans. Although he did not launch a massive invasion on the scale of his earlier campaigns, he maintained military pressure along the Danube frontier. Raids, threats, and diplomatic demands continued, as he sought to force the Eastern Empire back into submission. At the same time, Attila remained deeply involved in managing his vast coalition of subject peoples and allies. His empire was not a centralized state in the Roman sense, but a network of tribes bound together by loyalty, fear, and material reward. Maintaining unity required constant displays of strength and continued access to wealth. By 453 CE, Attila was preparing for another major campaign, likely directed against the Eastern Roman Empire. Contemporary sources suggest that he intended to renew large-scale warfare in the Balkans and possibly advance toward Constantinople itself. His military power remained formidable, and no rival force in the region could easily match him. Yet signs of strain were becoming increasingly apparent. Years of continuous campaigning had placed enormous pressure on both men and resources. The Hunnic army depended heavily on mobility and rapid success, and prolonged operations far from home increased the risk of internal instability. Moreover, rivalries among subordinate leaders were always present beneath the surface. Despite these challenges, Attila remained the undisputed leader of his empire. His authority rested on a combination of military success, personal charisma, and careful political management. Even after withdrawing from Italy, he continued to command respect and fear across much of Europe. The period following the Italian campaign thus represented a transitional phase in Attila's career. He had reached the height of his territorial reach and international influence. At the same time, the balance between expansion, diplomacy, and internal control was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. Unaware that his life was nearing its end, Attila was preparing for renewed confrontation with Rome. His ambitions remained undiminished, and his empire still appeared strong. Yet events soon would unfold that no military planning could prevent. In the early months of 453 CE, at the height of his power and while preparing for renewed campaigns, Attila the Hun died suddenly and unexpectedly. His death marked a decisive turning point in European history, bringing an abrupt end to the reign of the most powerful ruler the Huns had ever produced. The principal ancient account of Attila's death comes from the historian Priscus of Panium, whose work survives in later summaries. According to this tradition, Attila had recently married a young woman named Ildico and was celebrating the wedding with a great feast. After drinking heavily, he retired to his tent or chamber for the night. He was found dead the following morning, having apparently suffered a severe nosebleed or internal hemorrhage that caused him to suffocate in his sleep. This explanation is generally accepted by modern historians as the most reliable account. It suggests that Attila died from natural causes, possibly related to hypertension, stroke, or alcohol-related complications. There is no solid evidence to support later rumors that he was assassinated by his bride or poisoned by enemies. Such stories appear only in much later sources and reflect the tendency to surround powerful figures with dramatic legends. The suddenness of Attila's death shocked his followers and allies. Only months earlier, he had been planning new military operations and issuing diplomatic demands. His authority remained largely unchallenged, and no clear succession plan had been publicly established. His passing, therefore, created immediate uncertainty within the Hunnic leadership. News of his death spread rapidly across his empire and into Roman territories. For many in the Roman world, it was received with relief. Attila had been regarded as an existential threat, and his disappearance removed the most dangerous external enemy facing both Eastern and Western Rome. At the same time, Roman writers often interpreted his death as a form of divine judgment, reinforcing moral narratives about his career. Attila's funeral was conducted according to traditional Hunnic customs and was designed to reflect his extraordinary status. According to Priscus, his body was placed in 3 coffins, one of gold, one of silver, and one of iron. The precious metals symbolized the wealth he had extracted from his enemies, while the iron represented his military power. He was buried in a secret location, reportedly beneath a diverted riverbed. After the burial was completed, the workers who had prepared the grave were reportedly killed to prevent the site from being revealed. Although this detail cannot be independently verified, similar practices are known from other steppe and ancient cultures and are considered plausible by many scholars. During the funeral, Attila's warriors reportedly performed ritual lamentations, cutting their faces and shedding blood instead of tears. This act symbolized that a great warrior should be mourned not with weeping, but with displays of courage and sacrifice. Songs celebrating his victories and leadership were likely performed, reinforcing his legacy among his people. The secrecy surrounding Attila's burial has ensured that his tomb has never been conclusively identified. Numerous theories and legends have emerged over the centuries, but no archaeological discovery can be reliably linked to his grave. As a result, his final resting place remains one of the great mysteries of late antiquity. The death of Attila the Hun in 453 CE marked the end of an era, but it also exposed the deep structural weaknesses of the empire he had built. For decades, Hunnic power had depended overwhelmingly on Attila's personal authority, military reputation, and ability to distribute wealth. With his sudden passing, this system rapidly began to unravel. Attila was succeeded by his sons, most prominently Elik, who appears to have assumed primary leadership. Other sons, including Dengizic and Ernak, also claimed authority over parts of the empire. Instead of a clear and unified succession, power was divided among rival heirs, each supported by different factions. This division immediately weakened central control. Under Attila, loyalty had been directed toward a single dominant ruler. After his death, many subject peoples no longer felt bound by personal allegiance to his sons. Without his charisma and prestige, the ruling family struggled to command the same level of obedience. At the same time, long-standing tensions among the empire's subordinate tribes began to surface. Groups such as the Gepids, Ostrogoths, Rugians, and Suebi had served Attila faithfully in exchange for protection and rewards. Now, with the flow of Roman tribute disrupted and internal leadership uncertain, these peoples saw an opportunity to assert their independence. One of the most important figures in this process was Ardaric, leader of the Gepids and a former ally of Attila. Ardaric had been one of Attila's most trusted commanders, but after his death, he emerged as a central figure in the resistance against Hunnic domination. He organized a coalition of subject tribes determined to break free from Hunnic rule. This growing opposition led to a major confrontation in the mid-450s, traditionally known as the Battle of the Nideo River. Although precise details are scarce, ancient sources agree that this conflict represented a decisive turning point. The coalition of former Hunnic allies confronted the forces led by Attila's sons in a large-scale struggle for control of Central Europe. In this battle, Elik was killed, dealing a severe blow to the ruling dynasty. The defeat shattered the remaining authority of the Hunnic leadership and destroyed any realistic chance of restoring Attila's unified empire. With their principal heir dead and their military dominance broken, the Huns lost their position as the supreme power of the region. Following this defeat, the empire fragmented rapidly. Former subject peoples established their own independent kingdoms and territories. The Gepids took control of large parts of the Carpathian Basin. The Ostrogoths moved toward the Balkans and later into Italy. Other groups settled in former Roman lands or carved out regional domains. The Huns themselves did not disappear immediately, but their political influence declined sharply. Some groups remained in the Pontic steppe and along the Danube, while others were absorbed into neighboring societies. Over time, they merged with later nomadic confederations and Germanic populations, losing their distinct political identity. The Eastern Roman Empire took advantage of this collapse to reassert control over frontier regions. Without a unified Hunnic threat, Constantinople strengthened its defenses and re-established diplomatic influence in areas that had previously been dominated by Attila. The balance of power in Eastern Europe shifted decisively in Rome's favor. The Western Roman Empire, however, did not benefit in the same way. Although the immediate Hunnic danger had passed, the vacuum left behind contributed to further instability. Former Hunnic allies now moved independently, sometimes turning their attention toward Roman territories. The end of Hunnic unity thus reshaped, rather than stabilized, the political landscape of the West. The collapse of the Hunnic Empire demonstrated how deeply it had depended on Attila's personal leadership. Without strong institutions, clear succession rules, or administrative structures, unity could not survive his death. What had once been a vast and terrifying power fragmented within only a few years. This rapid disintegration stands in sharp contrast to the empire's former strength. It revealed that Attila had been not only its ruler, but its central pillar. When he fell, the structure he had created could no longer support itself. Now, we turn our attention to Attila's historical reputation and legacy. Few figures from late antiquity have generated as powerful, complex, and enduring a reputation as Attila the Hun. During his lifetime, he was feared across Europe as the leader of an unstoppable military force. After his death, his image continued to evolve, shaped by Roman writers, medieval chroniclers, and later historians. Over time, Attila became both a historical figure and a symbolic character, representing destruction, power, and the collapse of an ancient world. In contemporary Roman sources, Attila was almost universally portrayed in negative terms. Writers in both the Eastern and Western Roman empires viewed him as a barbarian enemy whose campaigns threatened civilization itself. He was frequently described as cruel, violent, and insatiable in his desire for conquest. Christian authors, in particular, framed his invasions as divine punishment for Roman moral decline. This perspective gave rise to his famous title, the Scourge of God, which emphasized his role as an instrument of divine judgment rather than as a political leader. One of the most important early accounts of Attila's life came from Priscus of Panium, whose writings offered a more balanced and nuanced portrait. Unlike many later authors, Priscus met Attila personally and observed his court firsthand. His eyewitness account provides rare insight into the daily life, political culture, and leadership style of the Hunnic ruler. While he did not deny Attila's brutality in war, he also emphasized his discipline, intelligence, and political skill. This testimony remains central to modern historical interpretations. Priscus described Attila's main residence as a large wooden complex located somewhere in the Hungarian plain, likely near modern-day Hungary's Tisza River region. The settlement included fortified enclosures, audience halls, and residences for nobles and envoys. While constructed from relatively simple materials, the complex was carefully organized and symbolized Attila's authority over his realm. Despite commanding enormous wealth, Attila himself lived with striking simplicity. According to Priscus, he dressed in plain clothing, ate modest meals, and used wooden cups and plates, while his guests were served on silver and gold. This deliberate contrast reinforced his image as a disciplined leader who valued strength and restraint over luxury. It also distinguished him from Roman elites, whose lifestyles were often associated with excess and decadence. In the centuries following the fall of the Western Roman Empire, Attila's image entered the realm of legend. In Germanic and Scandinavian traditions, he appeared as a powerful but often tragic figure. In the medieval epic Nibelungenlied, he is portrayed as King Etzel, a wealthy and formidable ruler whose court becomes the setting for dramatic conflict. Similarly, in Norse sagas, he appears as Atli, a king associated with both generosity and treachery. These literary portrayals reflect how Attila was absorbed into the cultural memory of post-Roman Europe. Rather than being remembered solely as an enemy, he became part of shared heroic traditions that blended history with myth. His character was reshaped to fit the values and concerns of different societies, demonstrating the flexibility of his legacy. During the Middle Ages, Christian writers continued to emphasize Attila's role as a divine instrument. Church historians often contrasted his destructive campaigns with the spiritual resilience of Christian communities. The story of his meeting with Pope Leo was repeatedly retold as proof of the Church's moral authority over even the most powerful rulers. This interpretation strengthened the symbolic status of the papacy in European political thought. In early modern scholarship, historians began to reassess Attila in a more systematic and critical manner. With greater attention to archaeology, comparative history, and source analysis, scholars moved beyond moral judgments and legends. Attila came to be understood as a product of the political and economic conditions of the late Roman world, rather than as an isolated force of destruction. Modern historians emphasize that his success depended heavily on Roman wealth, diplomacy, and internal divisions. His empire thrived on tribute, trade, and strategic manipulation of imperial rivalries. In this sense, Attila was not merely an external threat to Rome, but also a figure deeply embedded in Roman systems. His power reflected the vulnerabilities of the late empire as much as his own abilities. Attila's reputation has also been shaped by nationalism and political ideology in later centuries. In parts of Central and Eastern Europe, he has sometimes been celebrated as a heroic ancestor or symbol of strength. In Western Europe, he has more often been remembered as a destroyer. These contrasting views illustrate how historical figures are continually reinterpreted to serve modern identities and narratives. In popular culture, Attila has remained a recurring presence in novels, films, and documentaries. He is often depicted as a ruthless conqueror, emphasizing violence and spectacle. While such portrayals capture aspects of his career, they frequently overlook his diplomatic skill, administrative ability, and political pragmatism. As a result, popular images often simplify a far more complex historical reality. From a long-term perspective, Attila's greatest impact lay in his role in reshaping the political map of Europe. His campaigns accelerated the weakening of Roman authority, destabilized frontier regions, and contributed to the rise of new kingdoms. Even after his empire collapsed, the changes set in motion by his rule continued to influence European history for generations. Today, Attila is best understood as a transitional figure between the ancient and medieval worlds. He stood at the intersection of steppe traditions and Roman civilization, embodying both continuity and change. His legacy reflects the tensions, transformations, and uncertainties of the 5th century. Rather than a simple villain or hero, Attila emerges as a highly skilled and adaptive ruler who exploited the opportunities of his time with remarkable effectiveness. His reputation, shaped by fear, admiration, myth, and scholarship, remains one of the most enduring in European history. In conclusion, the life and career of Attila the Hun stands as one of the most striking examples of how individual leadership can shape the course of history. Rising from the world of the Eurasian steppe, he forged a vast and powerful empire that challenged both the Eastern and Western Roman empires at a moment of profound vulnerability. Through military skill, diplomatic intelligence, and personal authority, Attila became the dominant political figure of 5th-century Europe. From his early rise to power, Attila demonstrated a rare ability to combine force with negotiation. He understood when to wage war and when to extract concessions through diplomacy. His campaigns in the Balkans, Gaul, and Italy revealed not only his military strength, but also his strategic patience and awareness of Roman weaknesses. Rather than seeking permanent conquest, he focused on securing wealth, influence, and recognition. As a ruler, Attila created a political system capable of governing a vast and diverse population. His court, leadership style, and methods of reward and discipline allowed him to maintain loyalty among many different peoples. Although his empire lacked permanent institutions, it functioned effectively during his lifetime because of his personal authority and political skill. At the same time, his career highlights the fragility of power built primarily on individual leadership. After his sudden death, the system he had constructed collapsed with remarkable speed. Without his presence, unity dissolved, rivalries intensified, and former allies asserted their independence. Within a few years, the Hunnic Empire had ceased to exist as a major political force. Attila's impact on Roman history was equally significant. His invasions accelerated the weakening of imperial authority, disrupted economic networks, and contributed to the political fragmentation of Europe. While he did not directly cause the fall of the Western Roman Empire, his campaigns intensified the pressures that were already undermining it. In this sense, he was both a product of Roman decline and a catalyst for further change. Seen in this broader context, Attila emerges not simply as a destroyer, but as a central figure in the transition from the ancient to the medieval world. His life reflects the instability, transformation, and shifting balances of power that defined late antiquity. He embodied both the strength of steppe traditions and the vulnerabilities of Roman civilization. More than 15 centuries after his death, Attila continues to command attention because his story captures a decisive moment in European history. It is the story of how empires rise and fall, how leadership can unite vast populations, and how power can vanish as quickly as it is gained. By examining his life in full, from his early years to his final days, we gain a deeper understanding not only of Attila himself, but of the world he shaped and the forces that shaped him in return. If you found this video on Attila the Hun insightful and valuable, be sure to like this video, share it with fellow history lovers, and subscribe to Ancient Odyssey for more in-depth explorations of the ancient world and its most fascinating figures. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next journey through history.